Okay, we're getting close to the end, but first I want to welcome my panelists today. Benvindo, Ambassador. Bienvenida, Elena. We are very fortunate to have today such strong leaders representing the public sector, the private sector, civil society with us today, all dedicated to protecting the planet and the generations to come. And it's really been a decade now since the Paris Agreement set the world on an urgent path to solve and fight for the climate crisis. And this November, leaders are heading to Pará in Brazil for COP30. So I can't think of a better combination of panelists to talk about this today. Simon, let me start with you. I would say that even though last year saw the hottest temperatures ever recorded, we're seeing many governments that still are thinking about walking back on their climate targets. So at a time when the world is in a funny place and trust is in this process of wavering, I wanted to ask you, what's your message to governments that are falling short?
Thank you, Diego. It's a simple message, and it is weighing up the costs of inaction versus the benefits of taking climate action. And when you start looking at those benefits, with the energy transition, with taking action to mitigate against the worst impacts of climate change, whether it is better jobs, stronger economies, better health, more resilient communities, versus what we are seeing, whether it is the impacts of storms, hurricanes, wildfires, droughts, floods. The list goes on. I mean, every day you open the newspapers, you read the headlines of a climate impact somewhere in the world, and the days where those impacts were most felt in far-flung parts of the world, the most vulnerable communities, is happening right here in the most developed of countries. So no one is immune, no country, no region, no city. So the cost of doing nothing, it's people, it's economies that are paying the price. Take the necessary action, and the benefits are clear. And what we also see is where those who step back, others are stepping forward and filling those voids. Just to look at we talk about the economic opportunity, investments in clean energy, in the green transition, last year alone was in excess of $2 trillion. So the finance flows, which are channeled more to developed countries than they are developing countries. So the need to address that investment imbalance to ensure that those flows are also supporting developing countries in the global south is absolutely essential. So when we look at those that carry the greatest responsibility in terms of reducing emissions, it's 20 countries. It is the G20, 20 of the largest economies in the world, where 80% of global emissions are generated. So in terms of those governments that need to step forward, need to take leadership, lead the way, is absolutely clear. But then you have all of the others who, whether it is calls for emerging economies to take the necessary steps, but as I said in the opening, how do we support the most vulnerable? Those that do not have the financial means to take action are the ones who have contributed the least to the climate crisis. And how do we ensure that this process, this climate process that we're all part of, ensures that they get the support that is needed? And that brings us to COP30 and the opportunity at COP30, which calls for all countries within the Paris Agreement to come forth with their national climate plans, their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, which outline country by country their commitments and the actions that, that they are signing up to provide their contribution to reducing emissions. But through those NDCs, which are whole of economy, whole of society, they're also the blueprint for that economic transition from the richest, the most developed countries to the poorest, but to articulate those actions with the necessary support to take the necessary action that is required.
Fantastic. And when we talk about action, I want to now ask you, Elena, because you are one of the leading youth voices in the world demanding that, yeah, we should clap for Elena, yeah. Demanding that indigenous peoples move from the margin of the climate discussions to the center of the decision making. But I think some of these climate summits that you actually see, sometimes indigenous peoples are on the sideline. So when we think about now COP30, let me ask you, what needs to change to ensure that indigenous participation and leaders had real influence over the outcomes of COP30?
Yeah, I mean, we're basically demanding effective participation and that we're not sidelined from the climate negotiations, from the adopted texts. And I think, you know, indigenous peoples, we have self-determination, we are our own sovereign nations, and yet we're treated as merely, you know, civil society groups or NGO groups, which is not equivalent to what we represent. And you know, 50% of the world's intact forest is protected by indigenous peoples. 80% of the world's biodiversity is protected by indigenous peoples, and yet for 30 years we've been completely sidelined and have not been able to participate fully. And I think this COP30 represents an opportunity where we actually can participate and be part of the discussions, and not just show up for the photo ops, which is, I think, has been the case for the past 30 years. And to ensure that, we need to make sure that indigenous peoples can show up as, you know, through our representatives, through our own governing structures, can actually participate directly. And we also need to increase finance and funding and facilitate the kind of logistical part so that indigenous people actually can be, you know, at the center of where the negotiations are taking part. And so I'm really hopeful because I'm sitting here with the secretary and the ambassador, and I hope that we can actually see this happen. And I think this, you know, this COP, it's called the COP of the Amazon, and I think what's at stake right now, it's actually, do we save this critical ecosystem or do we not? And are we, as, you know, as global citizens, are we gonna just witness how we fail to protect our planet and how we just see it, you know, past the tipping point or not? Or are we actually gonna do something about it? And it's so critical, and I mean, I'm speaking about my home and where my people has thousands and thousands of years of history, but this matters to every single person in this room and beyond. And if we don't center indigenous climate leadership, I think it will be a failure, but we're not there yet. We have this opportunity to actually show up and make sure that resources are provided and that our effective participation is guaranteed.
Ambassador, thank you for being here. We know that you're a little bit busy these days, so we appreciate you being here. And COP will be hosted in Belém, which is definitely, carries huge symbolism, but also a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility. We've seen how state governments, for example, Governor Helder in Pará has really stepped up in terms of leadership. But we also know that local ambition alone is not enough. So Many are calling this the last real chance to course correct in terms of what needs to happen to protect the climate. And my question for you is, how can we make sure that this COP30 becomes a real historic moment in which national targets get achieved and we really get serious about protecting the Amazon?
Thank you very much, Diego. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here. And it's fantastic how Global Citizen is putting so many nice people together. And I think that it's bringing people together. This is the objective of the COP. The COP is a formal meeting of generally diplomats representing countries. And they discuss all these documents that are a bit mysterious. But it has to become something that most people understand, most people get involved, as was being discussed here before. President Lula chose Belém because he says, well, every time that I leave Brazil and I visit a country as president, people talk to me about the Amazon, people want to know about the Amazon, and the Amazon is infinitely more complex than most people think, and even than most Brazilians think, the Brazilians that don't live in the Amazon. So the idea is to bring people to a place that is unexpected, and that's why there is much speculation about the challenges of Belém, but I think that Belém is going to oblige everybody to think again about their opinions, about what they think is the right thing to do, including for the Amazon. And we have in Brazil this fantastic people like Minister Sônia Guajajara, who was here a few minutes ago, amazing indigenous peoples, and we want to bring them closer than ever, and that's why we're so happy that Elena also is going to join that effort. And we created a special circle of peoples so that they can participate in the elaboration of the documents of the COP. Because as you were saying, just to show up at the COP, the documents have mostly been discussed, have mostly been debated, and we want them to participate in the elaboration. So it's bringing people that not necessarily participate at COPs. And then we have two things happening at the same time. We have the COP of the negotiation, that they are all closed, discussing commas, but they are very important, the commas. And then you have the action agenda, where everybody can participate. Why? Because one thing is to negotiate document, another thing, completely different, is to implement, is the action, is what you have to do once you have this international legislation that is approved by governments. And the action agenda brings together subnational groups, indigenous groups, brings together business, and brings together everybody that in fact are the real people that will transform those documents into reality. So I think that you all have to come to Belém. You're most welcome to Belém. Best food in Brazil, by the way, the most sophisticated, most incredible fish you've ever eaten. You have to come.
You might get a lot of people going to Belém if we're not careful. Time flies, so I have one question that I want to ask, the same question to all of you. And Elena, you talk about hope, and I think there are a lot of reasons to be maybe pessimistic about the state of the world and how things are moving, but also there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic. So I want to ask each of you, where do you find optimism these days to help the planet and to solve for some of these issues that we're discussing today? Simon, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's always easy and it's a natural default to look at what has to be done, where all the challenges lie. And as custodian of this climate process, when we look back at where we were before the Paris Agreement 10 years ago, and this year in COP30 signals that 10-year anniversary of Paris, it gives us an opportunity to reflect. And when I reflect on where we were, certainly in terms of the temperature rise target before Paris, we were on track for a 5-degree increase in global temperatures. And we know the magic number is 1.5 degrees. Over that 10-year period, we've gone from 5, we're currently around 3 degrees. This year, in Belém, we will be revealing what the next push and that collective effort is to get us closer to 2, closer to 1.5. And there certainly will be a decline, not enough. And again, that's where we look at what additional effort is required. How do we accelerate with even greater urgency? But that trajectory in terms of what countries are committing to is showing commitment results. What is missing is the difference between the ambition they're showing through their pledges, through these commitments, and the actual work that is taking place on the ground. And we know that that implementation gap is massive and needs to close, but it is closing. So the challenge for us, and why COP30 is so important, it is that a moment of truth where we assess all of the calls for increased ambition, all of the calls for increased action, where precisely are we, and what is the next, the next round of commitments that countries are able to take. So the hope I take is the process, as cumbersome as it is, as difficult, as complex as it is, it's working just not fast enough. And when I sit in halls like these, especially when you spend time with the younger generation, their energy, their focus, their commitment, when you look at indigenous peoples around the world, again, as custodians of our natural planet, and again, their commitment, their voices, I take hope.
Amazing. Elena, where do you find optimism?
I think when I think about hope, hope can never be naive. Like, it needs to be grounded in what we're going through and in reality. But, you know, I go back home and I come from the Sarayaku territory, which we've been able to protect from oil companies, from any kind of intrusive activity on our territories. And I go back to the same little creek that I grew up by and the same little hut that I grew up in. And so that is still standing. And what even brought me into this kind of work is still standing. And then I look next to me and I see incredible young indigenous peoples putting in everything, you know, all the effort, everything they can into this work. And again, hope cannot be naive, but I think that when we look around us and we see what can be done when we actually like work together, the results are incredible. And we've seen that with so many success stories in Ecuador and beyond. And I think we need to continue to push for those, even in these like really, really dark times.
Ambassador, you have the last word.
Well, first of all, hope I find because I'm Brazilian, and Brazilians are amazing, and I'm surrounded by amazing people in my country. And so, and really, the more I learn about what people are doing in my country, civil society, it's really extraordinary. So there are definitely much more nice people than bad people in the world, and I think that's why we have to hope, we have to fight, and we have to be together at COP30 doing the right thing.
And that's a perfect way to end the panel. Thank you very much to all my panelists. Please give it a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.